Thank you. I have the advantage of simultaneous translation. I hope you have the same. Our first technical challenge is finding the presentation. Once I do that, we will be in a position to give it. This is looking encouraging. I recognize this. So this is going to be something completely different. I can't see the little thing down at the bottom. Anybody got any theories on which one I should be? That one? Now which one? All I want to do is get the thing up. Thank you.
It's okay?
We now have technical cooperation.
Absolutely, yes.
What we want is, oh, there it is. Thank you. Well, things just improved considerably, at least for me. Good. This is going to be a little different. And it's going to be done in 30 minutes. That is my allotted time. What we have is a panel with experts who know how to do things because they're actually doing them. I am going to talk to you more broadly about innovation, and I am actually going to shorten this presentation to keep within 30 minutes. We will probably come to an end after we consider Poland, which is a not uninteresting example. We talk a lot about innovation, and I am going to give you a definition which is used by the OECD, to which Poland has contributed a great deal over the years, your statistical office, which is a definition for measurement purposes. Measurement purposes. Now, I know people talk about innovation, and there are as many definitions as there are people, but when you produce statistics for international comparison or for monitoring within your country, then you want a definition. And this is the OECD definition, the implementing of a new or significantly improved good or service or process, marketing method, organizational method in business practices, workplace organization, or external relations. And implementing means putting it on the market. And that's all it means. And innovation does not have to be good, does not have to be bad, it just has to get to market. And I can give you two examples of a firm doing biotechnology for over a decade, spending $1 million on R&D every year, employing 100 people, was not classified as an innovative firm because the product had to go through all the clinical trials and it didn't get to market for over a decade. Then it was an innovative firm, after which it went bankrupt. The other example, no less cheerful, is financial services in the United States, which brought to the market monetized debt. They brought it to the market. It diffused rapidly. It was a great innovation from the perspective of statistics. However, it then lost value. It self-destructed and dropped us all in the financial crisis that we are now in. Those weren't very good examples. In Poland, we have excellent examples of innovations that work, create value, and enhance welfare. This being an aviation conference, I hope there are a lot of engineers in the room. If there are, systems theory will not come as a surprise. And one of the most effective ways of looking at innovation is as a system. And when you do innovation policy, it should also take a systems approach. So that simply means that we are looking at actors, and the actors in this game are governments, and we've heard about the role of government in supporting aviation this morning, the education, health, and research institutions, business, foreign institutions. Those are the actors that play in this game, and they can engage in a variety of activities like research and development, invention, diffusion, design, human resource development. Most importantly, just listening to a presentation on clusters is the role of linkages. Now, linkages can take all sorts of form. You might argue that this is a linkage with the discussion going on at the OECD, because I work there on occasion, bringing Poland and the OECD together. Contracts, collaboration, co-publication, grants, monitoring are all linkages. And what we just heard about in terms of clusters was the attempt to get firms to work together and to work with institutions of education in a particular region, in a particular industry. So linkages matter. The whole thing gives rise to outcomes, which in the short term, ideally, are jobs and growth, greater inclusiveness, equity, and longer-term impacts. And if we look at any innovation strategy in the world, the long-term goal is well-being and some global influence. Now, you notice I've got cultural change in there. And cultural change is not unimportant, because in some countries I speak in, there is considerable risk averseness. And it's very hard to engage in the activity of innovation if you aren't willing to take risk. And that requires some change. In one country I work in, if you go bankrupt, it is a public disgrace. And it takes you and your family years to recover from that. In New York, if you haven't gone bankrupt 3 times before breakfast, you are not trying. Different culture, different approach has long-term implications. The summary observation about innovation, the activity of innovation, is that it is dynamic. So if we have any economists in the room looking for equilibrium, you're not going to find it. It is complex. That simply means we don't understand it either. Or there may be a complexity theorist in a corner of the room. It is nonlinear. And what that means is that if you have a policy intervention, a tax credit, for example, and you increase it by linear amounts, you are not going to get out the side of the innovation system a correspondingly linear response. The positive and negative feedback loops caused by the linkages will ensure that you do not, and you may get something totally unexpected. Policy in this business is not easy. So when we look to governments for support for the aviation industry, there are implications of that which have to be thought about. And of course, it's global. So Poland is not isolated, and certainly your aviation industry is not isolated, as you have links with many of the multinational firms engaged in aviation. So the linkages make the system work, and if the linkages are not working, it is what is called a system failure. And I'll come back to that. Activities may need support. There is an argument that firms don't do enough R&D because they know that the R&D is going to leak somehow from the firm. They are not going to be able to appropriate everything they have invested in R&D. And that's why governments support R&D. So that is a direct support dealing with market failure. So we have system failure, we have market failure. When I'm working in Africa, it's even worse because not only do we not have some of the linkages, we do not have some of the players, the institutions which are necessary to anchor the system. I will make some observations which really do follow on the last presentation you heard. In every country in the world, more firms innovate than do research and development. That is a very important statement because you hear a lot about research and development. You do not hear a lot about SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, that can't afford to do research and development, but they still solve problems. They put better product on the street. They find better ways of doing it. And the question then is, what are the policies to help them? That is a fundamental question, and we had an example in the cluster talk about providing guidance to firms, because a startup firm, a new firm, almost certainly does not know how to manage what they are doing. So they need help with management. They need help with networking. And all of that is part of policy. So innovation and R&D are also highly dependent on the size of firm. So there is one policy for the Bombardiers of this world, or the Boeings, or the Pratt & Whitneys. There is another policy for the little three-person firm sitting outside the airport providing services to the aviation business. And that is something, if we are going to deal with governments, we need to take into account. So we need to understand the flows of knowledge, of human resources, and finance. And this is not just a government problem. It is an industry problem, because if you are going to ask government for support, it is important to be able to argue the case from your perspective. Another point which I will make, and I think it's an important point, the science system is different from the innovation system. And the science system is different because it's made up of academics like me, although I did work for a living for a while. It is made up of academics. Peer review is done by academics. Granting councils are full of academics who give money to academics, which is reviewed by academics. But if you get out into, I'm going the wrong direction, if you get out into the innovation system, it is made up of people like you who create value, who run firms, who try to make things happen. That is a different world, and from a policy perspective, has to be treated differently. Now, nothing is easy in this life, and making a system work is the objective of innovation policy, and innovation policy is extremely difficult. It can be narrow. A tax policy to support R&D is an example. It can be whole of government. Now, the footnote to that comment is that government departments not only have to talk to one another, they have to work together. Try getting a Department of Finance to talk to a Department of Industry. Now, maybe it happens in Poland. I can think of half a dozen countries where it doesn't. The system that they seek to influence is bounded. And I'll come back to what I mean by bounded in a second. And a possible role for policy is to change the boundaries or the framework conditions to increase innovation. So if I've got some systems people out there, think of working in a multi-dimensional box with walls. Now, you can focus on what you do, which is produce your product and get it to the market, or you can think about maybe pushing at the walls a little. And that is an important policy perspective. The longer-term framework conditions, which take decades, are education. And that is where you build a culture of innovation, an entrepreneurial spirit from the moment the children enter school. But that takes a very long time, and it's almost impossible to do education reform because everybody's had an education and they think they understand it. Culture. Culture may influence research, industrial products, trade. Think of stem cell research, think of genomics, think of a number of other issues, genetically modified foods, and trade in those items. So culture makes a difference. Health policy is part of innovation policy, especially in Africa. Sick people don't work very well. And wealth distribution. If 80% of the people in the country have very little wealth and 20% have most of it, it will be an unstable situation. I'm not calling for a return of socialism here. I'm just making an observation of what makes people work and contribute. The shorter term goals are easier to deal with. If we are looking at business, you can change overnight regulation. You can alter venture capital markets. You can deal with spin-offs. You can support spin-off firms. You can alter trade regulation, tariff barriers. You can change common agricultural policy. That was a joke, of course. This is Europe. Foreign direct investment is important, but what is really important when I'm giving this lecture, not this lecture, similar lectures in Africa, is the knowledge transfer. I work in a number of African countries where a large country, which I won't name, comes in and builds a road, a hospital, a school, a sports arena. They arrive with a large plane full of workers, they all get out, they build the thing, they all get back in the large plane, and they go away. No knowledge is transferred. In 5 years' time, nobody can maintain the plant, the school, the road, the hospital. So it even happens in aviation, perhaps not in Poland, but the transfer of knowledge is critical. Physical infrastructure is what we're talking about at this meeting, not just roads, ports, transportation, telecommunication systems, but moving people around, regional air services that are reliable and important to the region. And in a discussion I had earlier this morning, when I was asked about whether regional airlines should be subsidized, that was an interesting question. I'm still thinking about the answer. The answer I gave was as part of regional development policy, because having an airline matters. Having broadband also matters. If your city doesn't have broadband in every corner, it is struggling in a competitive world. So a regional airport matters, broadband matters. And social infrastructure, openness to collaboration, social networks, trust, mobility, and collective problem solving. Let me come back to clusters. The University of Waterloo is situated in the province of Ontario in Canada. It is surrounded by an old Mennonite community. Mennonites are great believers in sharing and helping, building together. It took the University of Waterloo spinning off firms in all directions 40 years before there was a visible, active cluster in Waterloo. So cluster policy is important, but it does not happen overnight. In fact, I would say that when you are dealing with these things, keep in mind that there are a number of time scales you're working with. Long-term framework conditions, decades, generations. Shorter term can happen in months if the Parliament is on side. Outcomes take years or decades. But think, there are many different. So we talk about innovation. We talk about innovation policy. We talk about changing the world and building a better Poland. How do we know we've done this? So there is a key question: how do we know the system is working? And that gets me back to statistical measurement, and that is where I began. Surveys are one source, administrative data, others linkage of data sets. These are things that can happen in your statistical office and should, so that you can monitor key indicators and see what is going on, evaluate the policy interventions, and then learn from them. Country reviews also work. You can get the OECD to come in and review innovation policy in Poland. They do this in all sorts of countries. It results in interesting discussions, let's put it that way. The real discussions are the ones that never get into the public domain. That's where the real learning takes place. But you end up with policy learning from either success or failure. Sometimes a failed policy is one of the most illuminating things that ever happens to you, because you learn why it didn't work, and the next one may work. So, generating public policy debate and adjustment of interventions. This is a learning business. Aviation, and I was born on a very flat part of Canada called Saskatoon because it was turned into an air base in order to train pilots. I have been watching the influence of aviation, civil and military, for a very long time. So we measure things and we make use of those measurements. So that gets me to building an innovation strategy, and I'm going to compress this because I recognize that I am talking to people that actually do things. So I will do a quick overview of innovation strategy, and I'm very mindful of my 30 minutes, so I suspect are you. A strategy needs a purpose. If we look around the world, most strategies are aimed at jobs and growth. President Obama goes one step further. He wants good jobs. He doesn't want Americans working in McDonald's, although a lot of them do. He wants good jobs and growth. The scope can be a sector, the aviation industry, a region, a technology, nanotechnology, science innovation, or a mix. And you can have few components, some or many. It is fundamental to have consultation and collaboration and to work out a means of governance at all levels. You can't just sit in Warsaw and set up a policy and expect people in the outer regions to make it work. You need to involve provinces and cities. So, this is simply something to look at, and we're going to come back to it later on in the meeting. You probably can't read it either, but these are all the areas that you would think about if you were doing an innovation strategy. And markets are important. Brand recognition for Poland is important. You are, I am sure, a lead market for some goods and services, and your firms are clearly competitively engaged, supported by financial services. But if they aren't, that is an area for policy intervention. People are fundamental. And notice I've said both highly skilled and not. And that gets us back to brand recognition of the country. You are a highly educated engineer visiting a firm in Poland. They welcome you. It looks like a great place to be, to do the sort of engineering you want to do. You then go down to the center of the town and you buy things, and you discover that you are badly served or ignored. I know this wouldn't happen in Poland, but I can tell you some countries in Europe where it does. And you think, do I really want to live here? And you don't want that thought to happen. So part of an innovation policy is ensuring that not just that you have a supply of the highly qualified, but that part of the culture is welcoming the highly skilled and valuing them. So we have others. I'm going to leap to the public sector in a moment, because we will see when I get to looking at Poland that the public sector plays a big role. In a lot of countries I talk in, it is industry that drives innovation and also drives research and development. We'll look at the figures in a moment. But public institutions have a major role in an innovation policy. And I have highlighted standard setting, because standard setting is a tool. It is also a weapon. And we'll come back to that in a later session. Government departments are part of it. Education at all levels, back to health and nutrition, and then monitoring and evaluation, policy, learning, and change. Learning, learning, learning. You don't just do it and walk away. Innovation policy is like having a dog or a house plant. You have to feed it, talk to it, and nurture it, and it grows. If you simply put it on the shelf or let the dog run around without looking after it, it will die. So innovation strategy, I said, science and technology is not a subset of the innovation strategy, and that simply illustrates it. Timescales are different, institutions are different, the culture is different, but they do overlap. And you occupy the big blob on the right, and that is important. Coordination is key. You can coordinate at the highest level if the president thinks it matters, at the ministry or department level, or at the sub-department level, and so on down. And it really depends upon whether this matters or not. Who takes an interest in it? Who champions it? And if it isn't championed at the highest level, it won't work as well. Consultation, I think, having watched this in a number of countries, is fundamental. There has to be a high-level advisory council of some kind on innovation, not on research, not on science and technology, not on education. That nearly got me thrown out of Columbia, I can tell you. But on innovation. So that means getting business people at the table as well as higher education and civil society. And should it work within the government and advise ministers, or should it contribute to public debate? You've got other forms of advice, and I have listed them there. So getting it done. Designing an innovation strategy, especially for your industry, is hard work. Implementing it is even harder work, and that's a challenge for governance. That's how you make it work. Coordination and communication, otherwise the dog dies. Maintaining stakeholder involvement, measuring, evaluating, and learning. Now, other countries do this sort of thing. There are examples out there, and one of the reasons why you are an active member of the OECD and the European Union, of which you are now president, and I congratulate you, you are able to bring these things back to Poland, and that matters. Well, let's look at Poland for a moment. There are a number of countries which I picked for two reasons. One, they had a GDP not too far removed from Poland, and two, they had a population not too far removed from that of Poland. And what I am going to do is simply draw your attention to a few simple ratios, which means I have to look at the screen and I don't have binoculars. I'm looking at our translator in the back. Look at business enterprise R&D, and that is the one with the 28.5 highlighted. Business enterprise R&D as a percentage of gross domestic expenditure on R&D. Gross domestic expenditure, or GERD, is the total expenditure in Poland on R&D. And look at the percentage done by business, the 28.5. Now, run your eye up and down that column. Do any questions arise? I would put to you. The GERD GDP ratio, this gets us to the Lisbon target. The Lisbon target is 3%, of course. And down at the bottom, I put in Germany. Germany is a significant trading partner for you. It is sitting at 2.78, the column with the 0.68 highlighted. 0.68 is a lower number than 2.78. Not only is Germany a market, it is a competitor, and is there a question looking for an answer there? Researchers per 1,000 of the workforce. Look at the 3.9, look at the other figures. And that is a not uninteresting number. I'm not drawing any conclusions. I'm putting the figures up there. You draw the conclusions. Foreign affiliates, their percentage of BERD. A foreign affiliate is Bombardier, Pratt & Whitney, Boeing, what have you, that comes and sets up a subsidiary in Poland. That firm is incorporated under Polish law, so it is a corporate person. It does R&D. And then you have domestic firms that are incorporated in Poland. So 23% of business R&D done in Poland is done by foreign affiliates. And that can be a good thing. It can also be a challenge in the policy domain. So all these numbers exist in the main science and technology indicators document, which the OECD produces and which is readily available to you. And looking at them provides you with a great deal of thought. Technological balance of payments is interesting as well. The big red line at the top is what you are paying for technological services. That's research and development, patent, licensing, copyrights, acquiring knowledge by other means. You're paying for this from outside of Poland. The blue line underneath is what you are getting for selling your R&D services knowledge abroad. And you see that you are running a slight negative balance. That is not a bad thing, but it is something you should know about and look at. Why is a negative balance not a bad thing? If you've got people who know what they're doing, producing value in industry, and that they know that they have to buy the knowledge from somewhere else, they know what to do with it. They know how to convert that knowledge into value. That matters. So running a negative balance of payments isn't a bad thing. You've probably all seen the Innovation Union scoreboard. All these things are on the web, and I will leave behind references electronically. If you look at the Innovation Union scoreboard, it divides the world up into innovation leaders, followers, moderate innovators, modest performers. You will see where Poland is on that slide. Now, there is an incentive, perhaps a number of incentives in the industry you're in, which is a very I think, an industry with an enormous amount of potential and international linkages. I'll tell you a story about Pratt & Whitney at some point. Actually, I will tell it now because I'll put that slide up and I'll tell you the Pratt & Whitney story. Pratt & Whitney isn't just in Connecticut or Poland, it's in Montreal, along with Bombardier. And there is the Strategic Aerospace and Defense Initiative. You want to talk about subsidies? There is a subsidy. So large amounts of money go to Bombardier in Montreal to do whatever Bombardier does. And you know what Bombardier does. And every now and again, when there is a change of government, there's some discussion about reducing this particular program because it looks like corporate subsidies. Corporate welfare, it's called by the more left-wing people. At that point, Pratt & Whitney, Bombardier, and that's a Canadian company, say, look, we're all over the world. We don't have to work here. We can go. Subsidy continues. Maybe there's a lesson there somewhere. There's the European Union view of its Innovation Strategy 2020, and mainly it wants to save the world very quickly. This is a very high-level thing. I'm not going to do Africa. I am going to talk a little bit about user innovation, and I'm actually a little over my time, so I'm going to say very little about user innovation, but user innovation matters. It matters because the SMEs and the clusters we're talking about are solving their problems, not just for putting product on the street, but their process technologies, they will be improving themselves. They use process technologies, they don't sell them. And to help firms that move things to market in a better way, transform inputs to outputs in a better way, organize themselves in a better way, this is an area which also needs help. Public sector innovation, in the OECD, we have got to the point of thinking we can write manuals about innovation in business. Why can't we do it in the public sector? And that paragraph I showed you earlier on, which is the top paragraph, there is a suggestion out there at the moment that we change how an innovation is implemented. Won't make any difference to you, but it will make a difference to government departments, which then can be measured in the same way you are, and statistics placed in the public domain. Some government departments don't want this, for some reason. Social innovation, communities solving their problems. We have an example with the clusters around airports, around cities. And that gets me to the conclusion that innovation strategies are country-specific, Poland-specific, can be region-specific, industry-specific, or technology-specific. And it's not an academic subject. It matters to you. Therefore, take it seriously, is my advice. And the challenge then is for business to influence the innovation strategy, its design and implementation and change. That's it. Lots of readings, but I will leave that with the organizers. Thank you.